So we're starting again. So thanks, Herman. So I'll give a bit of an introduction here to data type registries. Then we'll go on to questions. So data type registries working group in RDA was one of the first ones started. And it addressed the problem of implicit assumptions in data. And that's right on target with what RDA is supposed to be doing. RDA is supposed to be working on data sharing. But data sharing requires that the data can be parsed, understood, and reused by people and applications other than those that created the data. That's the key point to me. In fact, if you make your data available to others, but they don't understand it, it can actually be somewhat dangerous. Because it could be misunderstood and misused. So, is this a new idea? No, of course not. How do we do this now? Well, for documents, things that people understand, the key for interoperability is formats are enough, because assume that people can read the document. So that's why we have MIME types. And in some ways, the data type registry is a extension of the idea of MIME types. But it goes beyond syntax, beyond format. So the example here of a matrix. So you have a data set, which is a matrix, and you might know it's a matrix, and you might even know that all the values in certain cells are whole numbers. But that doesn't tell you what those whole numbers really mean. It's not enough for, I don't know as much. Knowing that, I don't know what you know when you created the data. Why is that number there? What does it really mean? How did you measure it? Sorry, I keep hitting my down button. I have to remember to hit the arrow. So data producers may not, or probably have not explicitly specified certain details. And that's what we're after. We want a way to precisely characterize those assumptions so they can be identified by humans and machines that are not involved in its creation. So, explicate and share assumptions using data types and data type registries. That seemed to us to be a reason to create a registry system, configurable for recording different kinds of types and support different kinds of disseminations of the type records. And since we assume there will be no data type czar, no single source, which would be both politically and practically unlikely to happen, these registries should also be federatable. We should be able to combine them in the usual federation sense of different people maintaining different registries, but being able to look at them all in a simple, straightforward way. So the emphasis of the group was certainly not on defining all the types, and certainly not on technology, because registries are relatively straightforward. Federation presents some interesting challenges, but hardly an insurmountable problem. So this is as much social engineering as it is technical engineering. So what is a data type? Well, for us, it's represented by a unique and resolvable identifier. This is key because the data types have to be unique, separable. You have to be able to take a type and find out what it means. And the way to do that is to give it an identifier that can be resolved to point to a data type record. And it has to be reliable. So it then becomes a shortcut for human and machine. So you create a data type, you associate a data set with a data type, and that association is in the form of an identifier, and the identifier leads to explanation of the data type. File formats and MIME types, again, have solved the representation problem at the unit level, but we are going to go more into the meaning of the data. So those sub-bullets are examples of that. We started with record structures, which I'll show you in a minute, and that will continue to evolve. It's not finished. We have the usual problem of trying to find the core among a lot of possibilities, and that seems to be coming clearer as time goes on. But I'm sure there's more to be done there. So data type registry would be low-level infrastructure. We've created a prototype of that, and it assigns unique and resolvable identifiers to type records. And it enforces and validates a common data model and expression, and that's necessary for any sort of federation. So across communities, to share data types, they have to be able to rely on common expression and common dissemination of the information. So it's not a Tower of Babel effect. Need an API for machine consumption, which we've done, and also a user interface for human consumption. So here's a use case. This is the one I had in mind when we started the group. In the upper left, you have users in the form of people or machines, and we assume here that they are encountering typed data, and it's typed data that they don't recognize. That is, they see it's data, it has a type, but they don't know what that type is, and they'd like to understand and use the data. So the type, which remember is a unique resolvable identifier, is sent off to this federated set of type registries as a query, and what comes back is type definitions, relationships, properties, and possibly service pointers. The response can be used locally for processing. That is, you now know what the person who created that data meant, and you can build some sort of script to analyze the data, or more interestingly, optionally, the type registry can contain or point to a service that understands that data type. Visualization, which is one of the little icons in the lower right cloud, is a simple example of that. This service then would be available to perform some operation on the data, like visualization. The result there, and I hope this becomes one of the uses of a data type registry. The result there would be that data of type X could be sent to service Y to produce output of form Z, in this case probably a graph or something like that. Now that was the use case I had in mind, but there's another one which surprised me a little bit. I mean, logically it was always possible, but I really didn't think it would be as popular as the first one, but in fact it's equally useful according to most people who have looked at this. And that's discovery, as people will look for types that match their criteria for data. You might want to find data sets that combine location, temperature, and date timestamp for a certain kind of geological event or atmospheric event, because you need that sort of data to extend your analysis. So the type registry, you query the type registry, it returns the matching types, and you look for that in repositories. The repositories would then have to provide type data as a search criterion. Okay, so that was our goal. The group went on for a couple of years and wound up in the current state today, as of this talk. So there's a prototype. It's been there for a while. It's at typeregistry.org. It will perform the functions I just enumerated, but it's a sandbox. It's not intended, and there's documentation there emphasizing this, it's not intended to be a functioning complete type registry. It's a prototype. It's a way to experiment with this. There are multiple adoption and evaluation projects in process, I'm pleased to say. If you were in the last RDA plenary, you saw at least one demo in Paris that I was aware of. There are some folks using it fairly seriously. The digital object identifier folks, which was one of the sources initially. Material science, and that's one of the examples I'll show. Deep Carbon Observatory, which is another example I'll show. And EU DAT, the large European data project. There's a follow-on data typing working group being proposed. In fact, I hope to see the charter for that today. Assuming that goes forward, as I hope it will, then there'll be a second working group that will consider policies, federations, try and nail down the data format, etc., the data model, and so on. So, what have we really accomplished? I'm going to do this and then get into a couple of specific examples. So the main accomplishment from my perspective was a confirmation that detailed, as it says here, detailed and precise data typing is the key consideration in data sharing and reuse, and that such a system of federated type registries is highly desirable. We got this feedback from a lot of people, and happily a lot of them were actual scientists. They seem to like this idea. We developed a prototype with a potential data model, which against various use cases have been tested, mostly successfully. We have multiple ongoing scientific data management efforts across a variety of domains. We integrated with one additional working group and one interest group in RDA, so it was an internal success at RDA. And we had a set of questions and tasks for further consideration. So the recommendation currently is sort of a model. And we believe there will be a follow-on recommendation, perhaps even a number of standards bodies have expressed interest in this. So we may wind up with something a little more specific in a standards body beyond the RDA recommendation. This is an example of an instance of the data model that we wound up with. This is describing a data set, or a set of data sets, of course, that measure water flow at a certain point in time. It has an identifier. The first thing you see there, that's a handle. It has a name, stream gauge, human level description, and some standards that it incorporates, some provenance, expected uses. That is, this would be a way to get a data set. This would identify a data set that measured the rate of flow in a moving body of water at some specific location over some specific time, and it would give you a flow rate. This is a common thing in hydrology, but it's done differently by different folks, and this would be an attempt to make all of the data sets resulting from such measures understandable. And those are the three main properties are the value itself, the coordinate, the geolocation, and the time. And those themselves build on other data types. All right, now we're going to show two examples. The first is the Deep Carbon Observatory project. This is a large project based at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute that tries to coordinate, facilitate a lot of research projects around the planet, part of a large Sloan Foundation grant. So they chose the DTR, to adopt the DTR to address, as I say here, core issue of data interoperability. Parse, understand, and reuse data retrieved from others. They also worked on the second RDA group called Persistent Identifier Information Types, which will probably be the source of other webinars, or already has been. And then the third bullet there describes themselves, the Deep Carbon Observatory Data Portal. Basically, they're trying to provide a single navigation point across a large number of projects, scientists, and institutions that are looking at carbon stored in the earth. And their website is listed there. So this is a high-level view of their structure, the things they're using. So it's a Drupal data portal. They use Vivo and CCAN for storing stuff, and they use the handle system to identify things. Every element in their universe is uniquely, persistently, and resolvably identified. Scientists, projects, data sets, results, etc. they label these handles DCO IDs. They had they considered two ways to integrate DTR, and I find this to be very interesting, very gratifying with the choice they made in the end. They could have taken, excuse me, they could have taken the prototype registry and used it as another element, along with the vivo platform that they use as a knowledge base. And the vivo platform would have queried the DTR in order to integrate the types. Alternatively, they considered simply taking the idea and the model and so on and incorporating it into their existing structure, and that's what they did. So they modified their ontology and added a class data type that would function exactly as though they had a separate data type registry. But they built out the vivo stuff to do that. So vivo now acts as the local data type registry. And they assign handles to the data types. They encode them as RDF, so they have very much a semantic web linked open data approach to this. This is a build. Let me finish the build. All right. So they have their data sets and ontology and types and so on all connected with each other. And they assume that there's a core basic data type registry. This is another problem, another issue that the working group will follow on. There's a lot of building of data types one upon another, and of course there will be a set of core data types, and the assumption here is that someone will run that. It's not clear yet who that will be. They've updated their ontology. This little eye chart here shows where data type lives, showing this just to show that they have a complete ontology that includes data type. And they export it as linked data. So this is a linked data type record for a data type, which is thermodynamics of chemicals and minerals, as you can see in the middle of this record. The data types get identifiers, that DCO ID 11121 in long string, that's a handle that resolves to the type for thermodynamics of chemicals and minerals, and that last list there at the bottom is the elements they record, and the way in which they record it is standard. And then you link the data set to that type. So when you get this data set, as shown at the bottom here, the little piece of the data set, you're told what type it is, and it lets you further interpret the data set, which is identified up here at the top. They've gone even further. They have a faceted browser to go among their types, so you can find the types they've used. They use data types within their dataset browser as well. So that's one of the elements that will show up when you look through the data sets that are available through their portal. You'll always find the types, and you can use type as a search element. So they've come to some conclusions. This is one of two slides about the conclusions. They found that data types, modeled as first-class objects, they're right up there with everything else they're doing, published as linked data, is an excellent way to annotate or further explicate the data sets. And you see they're enthusiastic about linked data, and those four sub-bullets show the reason. And here are their conclusions. Highly implementable DTR, especially in the environment of semantic web. That is, it's just not in opposition in any way. It's very complementary to the semantic web. And they find that it can be adopted and further extended for production use, which is what they're doing. They're using it in a production sense. And this last bullet, which is one that gratifies people inside RDA, is there's good researcher response. That is, researchers like it, that they can create data types and use that as a shorthand to explain to other people how to use their data, how to share their data. This is important in RDA, where we have to try to avoid the build it and they will come syndrome. We want to make sure that this stuff is useful for actual researchers. My second and final example is in a different area, although still hard science, and this is more engineering, is materials data. So there's this large group of people are associated with NIST and Kent State University and myself, and a consulting group that did the work. This is the NIST Materials Measurement Labs and Information Technology Labs. Materials measurement is one of NIST's stock and trade. NIST is the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology, and involves a couple of RDA working groups. Materials measurement is a very engineering-oriented group. Materials science, to those of you who don't know it, is the science of finding, building new materials, new kinds of things. You want an artificial knee that will never wear out. You want a turbine that will spin faster and hotter than any do now, and there are no materials that can survive that. Materials science attempts to find these new materials, build these down to the molecular level. And they saw in the data type registry a solution to a common problem. Here's some data that someone else gathered about a certain kind of material. How do I interpret it? What can I do with it? What does it mean? And specifically, they looked at the area of X-ray diffraction. X-ray diffraction is a way to inspect and characterize materials. And it's done through a set of proprietary instruments made by names you'd recognize, Siemens, Philips, and so on, that all measure basically the same thing in slightly different ways. So the idea is, can the data type registry help with all these measurements from around the world that are measuring basically the same thing in slightly different ways? Well, they took a different approach than DCO, equally valid. I'm happy that we have these two examples of doing it differently. They, reading from right to left here, they had a series of infrastructure components already deployed. On the far right, they had a registry of materials information. They had a repository, a set of repositories actually, that stored the information. And they added to this a data type registry using the prototype, downloading the software, which is readily available at that site. And they created a record, again, pretty much along the pattern of our core, provenance, expected uses, etc., properties. And this is the core is the properties. What are the properties of these materials as shown in the X-ray diffraction data sets? These are the, how do I explain this? These are the data types that they identified. They were looking for plottable. They need to take the results from these data sets, which are slightly different, normalize them, and put them on the same graph. This is something you can do by hand now, but it's difficult to do. If you go all the way down to the bottom, you see that X-ray diffraction of type whatever that is, to Greek symbol, is available in at least 5 different formats, and that would be true across all of those. And what they want to do is take any of those, what would be 5 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 types of data sets, and combine them in a way that would be plottable. And they did. It worked. There's even a video available, which we won't show here. And their example is a user looking for a certain type of material, and they limit it to diffractograms. And so they come up with these diffractograms, the results of the X-ray diffraction, and are able to gather multiples of those and put them on the same plot. Material science relies fairly heavily on these visualizations to understand what would otherwise be great masses of data. And Herman, that is my final slide. I hope people found that interesting and comprehensible, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.